6 months later, Marcus sat in the same cramped Santa Monica apartment, but the space felt different now, occupied by purpose rather than haunted by regret. The morning light that once seemed harsh now filtered through windows he'd finally cleaned, casting warm rectangles across a desk covered with correspondence rather than empty bottles. The letters came daily, some angry, some grateful, most simply seeking acknowledgement that their pain had been real. Rebecca Lawson's daughter had written twice, the first letter furious, the second asking for details about her mother's final months in Hollywood. Marcus answered each one personally, his handwriting growing steadier with practice. The tell-all interview had aired 8 weeks ago. 60 Minutes had given him 43 minutes to dissect 30 years of systematic destruction, and he'd used every second. No deflection, no justification, just the methodical cataloging of choices that had valued power over humanity. The industry had reacted predictably. Some called it opportunistic, others brave. Marcus had stopped caring about the distinction. Tommy's files had gone public anyway, but they'd landed in a media landscape Marcus had already reshaped with his own confession. The revelations became confirmation rather than exposure, transforming Tommy's perfect revenge into an elaborate footnote to Marcus's voluntary disgrace. Mrs. Chen's violin had gone silent 3 floors down. She'd mastered her difficult piece and moved on to something more challenging. Brahms, he thought, though his knowledge of classical music remained embarrassingly limited. Some mornings he considered knocking on her door, introducing himself properly after 3 years of nodding encounters in the lobby. Today wasn't one of those mornings, but the possibility no longer seemed impossible. His phone rang with the specific tone he'd assigned to Sarah's number. Their weekly calls had become routine, careful conversations that slowly excavated 30 years of mutual wariness. She'd been right about her career surviving the revelations. If anything, her reputation for integrity had been enhanced by contrast with her father's documented corruption. "Dad?" Her voice carried something different today. Not the measured distance of their recent conversations, but something warmer. "I'm here. I'm in Santa Monica, wrapped early on a location shoot nearby. Would you like to have coffee?" Marcus looked around his apartment, suddenly conscious of its limitations. The cramped kitchen, the second-hand furniture, the careful arrangement of sobriety that filled but didn't decorate the space. Here, or there's a place on the pier I've been meaning to try. Neutral ground. 20 minutes later, Marcus walked along the Santa Monica pier for the first time since moving to the neighborhood. The coffee shop Sarah had chosen overlooked the Pacific, its windows salt-stained but offering an unobstructed view of the horizon. She'd already claimed a corner table, looking impossibly elegant in jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than his monthly rent. "You look different," she said as he sat down. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down." Marcus ordered coffee. Black, no sugar, habits born of necessity becoming choices. "Tommy's been quiet lately. No more files, no more threats. I heard he lost 3 major clients last month. Turns out publicly orchestrating elaborate revenge plots makes people nervous about your judgment." They shared something that might have been amusement, a tentative recognition of shared perspective. Through the window, tourists wandered the pier's attractions. Families posed for photos, couples held hands against the ocean backdrop. The casual intimacy of people unafraid of each other. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," Sarah said. "Not the kind where everything goes back to how it was, but the kind where you stop carrying someone else's mistakes as your own burden." Marcus had been thinking about the same thing, the difference between redemption and recovery, between earning forgiveness and learning to live without it. "And what have you concluded?" "That maybe the point isn't whether you deserve to be forgiven. Maybe the point is whether you can become someone worth knowing going forward." The insight was so precisely Sarah, analytical but hopeful, refusing easy answers while maintaining faith in difficult ones. Marcus wondered what she might have become if he'd been a different kind of father, then pushed the thought away. Speculation about alternate histories was another luxury he couldn't afford. "The families I've reached out to," Marcus said, "most don't want money or apologies. They want to know their loved ones mattered, that someone remembers their names, their talents, who they might have become. And do you remember them?" I'm learning to. Not just as obstacles I removed, but as people who deserved better. Sarah nodded, something settling in her expression. That's enough for now. The remembering. They finished their coffee in comfortable quiet, watching the Pacific stretch toward a horizon that seemed less like an ending than a beginning. When they stood to leave, Sarah hesitated at the door. Same time next week? She asked. I'd like that, Marcus replied. Walking back to his apartment alone, Marcus felt the familiar weight of solitude, but it no longer pressed down like judgment. Some distances closed gradually, he was learning. Some conversations continued across years of careful silence. Some stories stayed with you not because they ended well, but because they ended honestly. Mrs. Chen's violin had resumed when he reached his building. Something beautiful, something hopeful, something finally mastered through patient practice. Marcus walked to his door, pausing only to straighten his shirt and run fingers through unwashed hair. In the hallway, Sarah stood with her back to him, staring out the narrow window at the end of the corridor. Dawn light caught the edges of her silhouette, and for a moment she looked exactly like her mother, determined, uncompromising, beautiful in her refusal to bend. I know, she said without turning around. What do you know? Everything. Tommy Meridian sent me files an hour ago, a preview of what goes public today. She faced him then, and Marcus saw no shock in her expression, no betrayal, only the tired recognition of fears finally confirmed. Rebecca Lawson, David Chen, all of them. Marcus felt his carefully constructed confession deflate. Sarah. 37 people. Her voice was steady, clinical. 37 careers you ended or damaged between 1980 and 1987. He documented every one. They stood in the fluorescent-lit hallway like strangers, 30 years of careful distance finally making sense. Marcus had always wondered why success had never softened his daughter's reserve, why achievement had never brought her closer. Now he understood. She'd been protecting herself from the truth she'd always suspected. I remember being 12, Sarah continued, and watching you work a room at some industry party. The way people looked at you, not with respect but with terror. Even then, I knew you weren't like other fathers. I was trying to build something for you. For our family. No, you were building something for yourself. The family was just collateral. She leaned against the window frame. Do you remember what you told me when I got my first agent? You said, don't trust anyone in this business completely. Everyone has a price. Marcus remembered. He'd meant it as protection, wisdom earned through bitter experience. I spent years thinking you were warning me about other people, Sarah said. It wasn't until I got older that I realized you were warning me about you. The words hit harder than any of Tommy's revelations. Marcus saw himself through his daughter's eyes, a cautionary tale she'd been navigating around her entire adult life. The suicide attempt, Marcus said quietly. 3 years ago, you never came to the hospital. I couldn't. Sarah's voice cracked for the first time. I was terrified that if I saw you like that, I'd forgive you before I understood what I was forgiving. Marcus leaned against the opposite wall, the hallway feeling simultaneously too narrow and vast as an ocean. Tommy thinks releasing this will destroy your career. That's his leverage. Tommy thinks like you used to think. That reputation is everything. That shame is fatal. Sarah turned to face him fully. But I've spent 15 years building a career that can survive the truth. Clean projects, honest relationships, no shortcuts. I learned from watching your mistakes. And if it's not enough, if the industry decides guilt by association is enough to end you? Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving, not bitter, but genuinely amused. Then I'll know the industry isn't worth saving, and I'll find something else to do with my life. The simplicity of it staggered Marcus. His daughter possessed something he'd never learned, the ability to define success for herself rather than letting others define it for her. What happens now? He asked. Now you tell the truth, all of it. Not to save yourself or stop Tommy, but because those 37 people deserve to have their stories told properly. By you, Marcus nodded slowly, understanding flooding through him. And us? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the harsh hallway light. I don't know yet. But for the first time in 30 years, I think there might be an us to figure out. Down the hall, Mrs. Chen's violin resumed its practice. The same piece she'd been struggling with for months, but cleaner now, the difficult passages flowing with new confidence. Marcus thought of Tommy in his glass office, probably preparing press releases and media strategies, still believing the old rules applied. Still thinking power came from what you could destroy, rather than what you could build. "I need to make some phone calls," Marcus said, starting with Rebecca Lawson's family. Sarah nodded. "I'll help. I know people at the major outlets, producers who care about getting stories right rather than just getting them first." As they walked back toward Marcus's apartment, Sarah spoke without looking at him. "This doesn't fix anything between us. Not yet. But it's a beginning." "A beginning is more than I had yesterday," Marcus replied. Behind them, the sunrise continued its slow burn across Santa Monica, and somewhere in Hollywood, Tommy Meridian was about to discover that the most devastating truth wasn't always the one your enemies revealed about you. Sometimes it was the one you chose to reveal about yourself. The laptop arrived 30 minutes later. Different courier this time, a woman with dead eyes who handed over the package without a word. Marcus didn't bother asking questions. He knew Tommy was orchestrating every detail, every timing, every revelation calibrated for maximum impact. Inside the box, nestled in foam padding like a sacred relic, was a sleek black laptop with a single sticky note attached. Password, Meridian 1987. The machine hummed to life with predatory efficiency. One folder sat on the desktop, Marcus's greatest hits. His cursor hovered over it for a full minute before he found the courage to click. Dozens of video files. Hundreds of documents. 30 years of secrets Marcus thought had died with the analog age, now digitized and cataloged with museum-quality care. The first video made his blood freeze. Security footage from the Chateau Marmont, December 1985. Marcus watched his younger self slip an envelope to a reporter in the hotel bar, grainy but clear enough to identify both faces. The envelope contained photos that would destroy a young actress's reputation by morning. Cocaine, married men, career over before it really began. He'd forgotten about Rebecca Lawson until this moment, sweet kid from Nebraska who'd trusted the wrong manager. Marcus had buried her for a client who wanted a role she'd been promised. Standard business in those days. Collateral damage. The file was labeled Rebecca. Suicide. March 1986. Marcus's hands began to shake. Rebecca hadn't killed herself over a man or drugs or the usual Hollywood cliches. She'd killed herself because Marcus had systematically destroyed every opportunity, every relationship, every hope she'd had. The precision of it was his signature. Death by 1,000 cuts until the victim did the work themselves. He opened another file. David Chen, a young director who'd crossed Marcus's biggest client. Marcus had planted evidence of plagiarism, destroyed his credibility, made him unemployable. The kid had moved back to Taiwan, became a teacher, never made another film. Another, Maria Santos, a casting director who'd refused to play ball. Marcus had whispered the right words to the right people, suggesting she was skimming money. Blacklisted within a month. File after file, each one a career Marcus had ended with surgical precision. But these weren't just records. They were confessions. Detailed documentation of methods, motivations, the careful orchestration of professional assassination. And somehow, Tommy had collected them all. Marcus opened a document labeled insurance and found his own handwriting. Notes he'd kept in a safety deposit box. Insurance against the clients he'd served. Evidence of their indiscretions, their crimes, their secrets. He'd digitized nothing in those days. Trusted only paper and locked metal boxes. But here it was. Every word, every photograph, every devastating detail. A new video file appeared on the desktop while he watched, uploaded in real time. Marcus clicked it with mounting dread. Sarah's face filled the screen. Not a professional headshot, but surveillance footage from her apartment. She was on the phone, pacing, clearly agitated. The audio was crystal clear. "I don't understand why they're asking about Dad," she was saying. "He's been out of the business for decades. He's sick, barely functional. What could he possibly have to do with some actor from the 80s? The voice on the other end was too faint to hear, but Sarah's responses told the story. "No, I never heard that name before today." Tommy Meridian? Are you sure? Jesus Christ, how many people did my father destroy? Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. The casual dismissal in her voice, sick, barely functional, hurt more than any revelation Tommy had engineered. But worse was the dawning realization in her tone as the conversation progressed. Wait, you're saying there are more? This is just the beginning? How much more? Oh God, what if people think I knew? What if they think I'm complicit? The video cut to black. A new message appeared in the center of the screen. She's starting to understand what you really were, what you cost people. Tomorrow, the entertainment media gets everything, every file, every secret, every life you destroyed for money. But I'm feeling generous tonight, Marcus. Sentimental, even. You gave me the greatest gift of all. You taught me how to be you. So I'm offering you a choice. There's a gun in the bottom drawer of your kitchen. I put it there 3 years ago. 1 bullet. You can end this story the way you ended so many others. Quietly, efficiently, with minimal mess. Or you can let the world see what Hollywood's most feared publicist was really capable of. Every detail. Every victim. Every life you snuffed out for pocket change and petty revenge. Your daughter's career will be the first casualty, of course. Guilt by association. The industry loves a good cleansing fire, as you well know. Choose wisely. You have until sunrise. Your most devoted student. Marcus stumbled to the kitchen drawer, pulled it open with trembling hands. The gun sat there like a coiled snake, small, efficient, perfectly suited to the task. Mrs. Chen's violin had stopped. The building held its breath. Through his window, dawn was still hours away, but Marcus could already see his daughter's future burning. Marcus stared at the gun, its weight heavier in his palm than physics should allow. 3 years. Tommy had been in his apartment, touching his things, planning this moment while Marcus drowsed through scotch-soaked afternoons, believing himself forgotten by the world. The revelation should have terrified him. Instead, it sparked something he hadn't felt since 1987, professional curiosity. The meticulous planning, the psychological manipulation, the perfect timing. It was masterwork. Tommy had learned well, too well. Marcus set the gun on the kitchen counter and returned to the laptop. If Tommy wanted to play teacher and student, then it was time for a final exam. He opened a new video file labeled Marcus, the full story. The screen filled with contemporary footage, Marcus himself, filmed through his apartment window over the past 3 years, drinking alone, watching old talk shows, the pathetic routine of his exile captured in brutal high definition. But the timestamp made his blood stop. The earliest footage was dated 4 years ago, before his breakdown, before his retreat to Santa Monica. While he was still living in the Hollywood Hills, still maintaining the fiction of a career, still pretending the guilt wasn't eating him alive. Tommy hadn't found him after his fall. Tommy had orchestrated the fall itself. Marcus opened file after file, finding a paper trail that rewrote his entire collapse. The client who'd accused him of leaking confidential information, fed lies by an anonymous tip, the financial audit that had revealed irregularities in his accounts, triggered by documents someone had planted. The final scandal that drove him from Hollywood, a leaked recording of Marcus admitting to past indiscretions, speaking to someone he'd trusted, someone whose voice, Marcus now realized, had been Tommy's all along. "You son of a bitch," Marcus whispered to the empty apartment, but there was admiration in his voice alongside the rage. Tommy hadn't just learned Marcus's methods, he'd perfected them. The laptop chimed. A new message appeared. "Having second thoughts about the gun. Good. I was hoping you'd dig deeper. You always taught me that the best revenge required the victim's full understanding. Are you understanding yet, Marcus?" A video call window opened automatically. Tommy's face appeared on screen, older now but unmistakably the man who'd once played victim so perfectly. He sat in what looked like a luxury office, city lights glittering behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Hello, Marcus. You're looking well. Sobriety suits you." "When?" Marcus asked. "When did you decide to become me?" "The moment you taught me that reputation is the only currency that matters in this town." Tommy leaned back in his chair. October 15th, 1987, 11:47 p.m. "You want to know what I was thinking when I watched your face in that producer's booth? I was thinking, here's a man who understands power." Marcus felt the pieces clicking together with sickening precision. The twin brother story. David died in a car accident 3 months before the Conan show. I buried him quietly, took his identity when needed. Having two personas proved useful. I could be the victim and the mastermind simultaneously. 30 years of planning. 30 years of building. While you rotted in guilt, I became everything you taught me to be. I have clients now, Marcus. Important ones. I shape narratives, destroy enemies, protect the powerful. Just like you did. The admiration in Tommy's voice was more disturbing than any threat. Marcus understood now why his old methods felt so familiar in Tommy's hands. He wasn't facing revenge. He was facing graduation. What's the endgame? Marcus asked. Tommy's smile was Marcus's own from 3 decades ago. Confident, predatory, utterly without remorse. There is no endgame. This is the game. I've become Hollywood's most feared publicist, and now it's time for the old king to acknowledge the new one. Your files, your secrets, your reputation, they're all going public tomorrow, but your daughter's career will be spared. Why? Because Sarah represents the future. Clean, talented, untainted by your legacy. With proper management, she could become a real star. The presumption in Tommy's voice triggered something Marcus had thought long dead, his territorial instinct. Sarah wasn't just his daughter, she was his legacy, the one thing he'd kept clean. You want to manage her, Marcus said. I want to give her the career she deserves. Under my guidance, of course. There it was, the arrogance Marcus had been waiting for. After 30 years of perfect planning, Tommy had made the same mistake every Hollywood power player eventually made. He'd assumed he understood what mattered most to his target. Marcus looked at the gun on his counter, then back at Tommy's satisfied face on the laptop screen. You know what your biggest error was? Enlighten me. You assumed I still cared about my reputation, that I'd kill myself to avoid exposure. Something flickered behind Tommy's eyes, the first crack in his composure. Marcus smiled for the first time in years. But I died 3 years ago, Tommy. You killed Marcus Kellerman the moment you put me in this apartment. What you're threatening to expose is already dead. Your daughter will survive whatever you throw at her. Because unlike you, she never learned to need other people's destruction to feel alive. The revelation hit Tommy like a physical blow. For all his planning, he'd built his revenge around a man who no longer existed. The silence stretched between them, 30 years of calculation colliding with the reality Tommy hadn't anticipated. Marcus watched his former victim's face contort as the carefully constructed scenario began to crumble. For the first time since 1987, Tommy Meridian looked genuinely surprised. You're bluffing, Tommy said, but his voice carried the first tremor of uncertainty. Marcus stood slowly, feeling strength flow back into muscles that had been atrophied by guilt and scotch. Am I? Tell me, Tommy, what exactly are you exposing? A broken drunk who already confessed his sins to anyone who'd listen? A man who destroyed his own life more thoroughly than you ever could? The laptop screen flickered as Tommy leaned closer to his camera. Your daughter's career will survive because she built it herself. Clean. No shortcuts, no dirty deals, no fathers pulling strings. Marcus moved toward the window, looking out at the city that had once been his kingdom. You want to know the difference between us? You learned my methods, but you never understood why they stopped working. They worked perfectly. I've used them for 3 decades. On people who still believed reputation mattered. People who had something to lose. Marcus turned back to the screen. But guilt is a funny thing, Tommy. It inoculates you against shame. I've been living in my own exposé for years. The crack in Tommy's composure widened. Marcus could see him shuffling papers off camera, probably checking contingencies, backup plans, alternative pressures. The desperate scrambling of a man whose masterpiece was dissolving in real time. The files go public regardless, Tommy said, struggling to regain control. Every victim, every crime. The world will know what Marcus Kellerman really was. Good. They should know. Marcus surprised himself with the sincerity in his voice. Rebecca Lawson deserves to have her story told. David Chen, Maria Santos, all of them. Let their families know it wasn't their fault. Let the industry see what we were really doing to each other. You're destroying yourself. I destroyed myself the day I chose power over conscience. You're just writing the epilogue. Tommy's office seemed smaller now. the city lights behind him less impressive. Marcus realized with growing clarity that his former victim had trapped himself in the same golden cage that once held Marcus, dependent on fear, addicted to control, believing his own mythology. "Sarah won't forgive you," Tommy said desperately. "When she sees what you did, what you were capable of, she already knows." The words came out before Marcus fully understood their truth. Not the details, but the essence. "Why do you think she built her career so carefully? Why she never asked for my help, never used my connections? She's been protecting herself from my legacy since she was old enough to understand what legacy means." The realization settled over him like dawn. Sarah's distance, her independence, her insistence on doing everything herself, it hadn't been rejection, it had been wisdom. She'd seen the poison in his world and chosen a different path. Tommy's face had gone pale on the screen. 30 years of planning, 30 years of becoming the thing you hated. "Congratulations, Tommy. You're everything I was at my worst, and just as trapped." Marcus moved closer to the laptop. "But here's what you never learned in all those years of study. The only way out is through. You want to release those files? Do it. You want to destroy what's left of Marcus Kellerman's reputation? Be my guest." "This isn't how it ends," Tommy said, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. "No," Marcus agreed. "This is how it begins. For the first time in 30 years, I get to choose who I am instead of who I was." He could see Tommy scrambling now, fingers flying over a keyboard off camera, probably activating dead man switches, releasing files early, trying to salvage some victory from the wreckage of his perfect plan. Let him. Marcus felt lighter than he had in years. "You think this absolves you?" Tommy's voice cracked with rage and desperation. "You think confession equals redemption? I think confession equals truth. And truth is the only currency that matters once you've lost everything else." Marcus closed the laptop, cutting off Tommy's protests mid-sentence. The apartment fell silent except for Mrs. Chen's violin resuming its practice through the walls, something beautiful this time, hopeful. He picked up the gun from the counter, weighing it one final time before opening the chamber and letting the bullet fall into his palm. Such a small thing to carry such enormous weight. He pocketed the bullet and left the gun where it lay. His phone rang. Sarah's number. "Dad?" Her voice was different now. Not the frightened girl from earlier, but the strong woman she'd become despite his failures. "I'm here," he said. "We need to talk." "Yes," Marcus said, looking out at the city where dawn was finally breaking. "We do." The courier's smile widened, and Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Those eyes, pale blue, almost translucent, held a recognition that made no sense. This kid couldn't be older than 25, born years after Marcus's world had imploded on live television. "Special delivery," the young man said, extending the manila envelope. "From an old friend." Marcus's hand trembled as he accepted it. The envelope was heavier than it should be, with something hard and rectangular inside. His name was written across the front in careful block letters, not printed, but hand-drawn with the precision of an architect or someone who'd had decades to practice. Who sent this? Marcus managed, but the courier was already walking away, whistling something that sounded almost familiar. By the time Marcus stepped into the hallway, the young man had vanished around the corner, leaving only the faint echo of his tune hanging in the stale air. Marcus closed the door and leaned against it, the envelope burning in his hands like evidence. Mrs. Chen's violin had gone silent. The building felt suspended in unnatural quiet, as if the entire world was holding its breath. He carried the envelope to his kitchen table, pushing aside empty bottles and yesterday's newspaper. The paper's edges were sealed with clear tape, professional, methodical. Inside, his fingers found a VHS cassette wrapped in tissue paper, along with a single sheet of letterhead from Meridian Entertainment, a production company that had folded in the mid-90s. The letter was dated today. Impossible, but there it was in black and white. "Marcus, 30 years is a long time to wait, but patience has always been my greatest virtue. I promised I'd see you soon. Tonight you'll understand what soon means to someone who learned everything from Hollywood's most feared publicist. Play the tape, alone. Your most grateful student." No signature, but Marcus didn't need one. The careful handwriting, the theatrical timing, the promise finally kept, it all pointed to a ghost that had haunted his dreams for 3 decades. Tommy. Marcus's hands shook as he inserted the tape into the ancient VCR he'd kept connected to his television. Static filled the screen before resolving into crisp, professional footage. Not the grainy transfer he'd been watching, but original quality film that made every detail razor-sharp. The date stamp in the corner read October 15th, 1987. The night everything changed. But this wasn't the footage Marcus remembered. The camera angle was different, wider, showing parts of the studio audience he'd never seen before. In the front row, a figure in a baseball cap kept his head down, face obscured but posture familiar. Something about the way he held his shoulders, the careful positioning to avoid the cameras. The tape played through Tommy's impossible performance, but with this new perspective, Marcus could see what he'd missed. The man in the cap wasn't watching Tommy, he was watching the producer's booth, watching Marcus. And when Tommy delivered his devastating final line, the figure in the cap nodded once, as if checking off an item on an invisible list. The tape didn't end with a commercial break. It kept rolling. Marcus watched himself stumble from the booth, saw his younger self's panic in brutal high-definition clarity. But the camera followed something else, the figure in the cap rising from his seat, moving against the flow of confused audience members, heading toward the stage entrance with purposeful strides. A new scene. Backstage footage Marcus had never seen, never knew existed. Security cameras capturing Tommy as he was escorted from the set, his composed facade finally cracking. But not with shame or fear, with satisfaction. The smile that spread across his face was predatory, triumphant. And there, waiting in the shadows of the backstage area, was the man from the audience. He removed his cap, and Marcus's scotch-numbed brain struggled to process what he was seeing. It was Tommy, a different Tommy, older, harder, but unmistakably the same person who'd just been humiliated on national television. Two Tommys. One playing the victim, one directing the performance. The tape cut to black. When it resumed, the timestamp showed 3 hours later. The younger Tommy sat across from his older counterpart in what looked like a hotel room, their faces illuminated by harsh lamplight. "Phase 1 complete," the older Tommy said. His voice was rougher than the smooth television performer, seasoned by years Marcus couldn't account for. Kellerman took the bait perfectly. The younger Tommy, the one Marcus had thought he'd destroyed, leaned back in his chair. 30 years seems excessive. 30 years is what it takes to build something beautiful, the older man replied. Kellerman taught me that patience is the publicist's greatest weapon. We're going to give him a master class in his own philosophy. Marcus hit the stop button, his finger jabbing at the VCR controls with desperate force. The screen went black, but the images burned behind his eyelids. 2 Tommies, 1 performance, 30 years of planning. His phone rang. The landline's shrill cry cut through the apartment's silence like a blade. Marcus stared at the caller ID display, knowing what he'd find there. Unknown number. But he knew who was calling, had always known this moment would come. The phone kept ringing, each tone a countdown to the conversation that would explain everything, or destroy what little remained of his sanity. Marcus reached for the receiver, his hand steady for the first time in years. Marcus's hand hovered over the receiver as the 4th ring pierced the silence. His fingers, which had trembled moments before while holding the envelope, were now perfectly still. The alcohol-induced haze that had blanketed his thoughts for years suddenly lifted, revealing a clarity he hadn't felt since 1987. He picked up on the 5th ring. "Hello, Marcus." The voice was exactly as he remembered, smooth, controlled, with that slight theatrical undertone that had once charmed talk show hosts and casting directors alike. But there was something else now, a depth that came from decades of patience. Tommy. Marcus surprised himself with how steady his own voice sounded. "Did you enjoy the tape?" Marcus looked at the black television screen, still processing the impossibility of what he'd witnessed. Twins. Brothers, actually. Identical, yes, but David was always the better actor. I preferred working behind the scenes. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Marcus sank into his cracked leather chair, the phone cord stretching taut. "You orchestrated your own destruction. I orchestrated my education. You were an excellent teacher, Marcus, though perhaps not in the way you intended." Through the thin walls, Mrs. Chen's violin resumed its melancholy practice. The ordinary sound felt surreal against the backdrop of a 30-year revelation. "What do you want?" Marcus asked. "What I've always wanted. What you taught me to want. Control over the narrative. The power to make or break careers with a whisper. I lost everything. I've been rotting in this apartment for... You've been waiting. Just as I planned." The casual certainty in Tommy's voice sent ice through Marcus's veins. He thought of Sarah, of her excitement about the new role, of how carefully she'd built her career away from the shadow of his reputation. "Sarah doesn't know anything about this," Marcus said quickly. A pause. In the silence, Marcus could hear traffic in the background of Tommy's call, the distant hum of a city that had moved on without either of them. "Your daughter is quite talented," Tommy said finally. "That audition last week, remarkable performance. Very authentic." The scotch turned to acid in Marcus's stomach. "You stay away from her. I haven't touched her career, Marcus. That would be crude. Unworthy of everything you taught me about subtlety." Marcus gripped the phone tighter. "Then what?" "Check your messages." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the receiver, his mind racing. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing inward like a coffin. He stumbled to his answering machine, its red light blinking insistently. 3 messages. The first was Sarah, her voice strained. "Dad, call me back. Something's happening. The producers want to meet tomorrow. They're asking strange questions about you, about the 80s. I don't understand what's going on." The second was unfamiliar. A reporter from Variety, Mr. Kellerman, were following up on some vintage footage that surfaced online. A viral video from 1987. "We'd like your comment on allegations that you orchestrated the Tommy Meridian incident. Please call us back." The third message chilled him more than the others combined. It was Jennifer, his former assistant, her voice older but unmistakably terrified. "Marcus, I know we haven't spoken in years, but something's wrong. Someone's been asking questions, digging into the old files. They know things, Marcus, things only you and I knew. I can't talk on the phone. If you're listening to this, don't trust anyone, and whatever you do, don't..." The message cut off abruptly. Marcus played it again, then a third time. Jennifer's fear was palpable, infectious. She'd been with him during the worst of it, had helped bury secrets that could still destroy lives even 3 decades later. His phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number he recognized. Sarah. "Dad?" Her voice was small, frightened. "There are photographers outside my apartment. They're asking about Tommy Meridian." "Who is Tommy Meridian?" Marcus closed his eyes. Through the walls, Mrs. Chen's violin had shifted to something darker, more urgent. Even she seemed to sense the change in the air. "Stay inside," he told his daughter. "Don't answer the door. Don't talk to anyone." "Dad, you're scaring me." "I'll handle this," Marcus said, though he had no idea how. "Just stay safe until I figure this out." After hanging up, Marcus stood in his kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of his exile. The empty bottles, the stale air, the framed photos of a career that had died 30 years ago. It all felt like a carefully constructed prison now. A holding cell where Tommy had kept him while orchestrating something far more elaborate than revenge. The question wasn't what Tommy wanted. The question was what he'd already taken. And Marcus was beginning to suspect the answer would destroy them all. 30 years of waiting had worn Marcus down to bone and sinew. The Porsche was long gone, sold during the 3rd bankruptcy. The Malibu house, the Rolex collection, the network of favors and fears that had once made him untouchable, all ashes now. What remained was this, a studio apartment in Santa Monica where the walls were thin enough to hear Mrs. Chen practicing violin at 3 in the morning, and the ghost of Tommy's smile haunting every bottle of Macallan he emptied. Marcus sat in his recliner, the leather cracked and splitting like old skin, watching the same talk show footage he'd obsessed over for decades. The small television screen flickered with the grainy quality of converted film, but every pixel was burned into his memory. There was Tommy, frozen in that moment of impossible triumph, and there was Marcus himself, barely visible through the booth's tinted glass but unmistakably present, the puppet master caught in his own strings. The apartment smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. Empty bottles lined the kitchenette counter like amber soldiers, each one a failed attempt to drown the memory of those 7 words. Thank you, Marcus. I'll see you soon. 30 years. Tommy had never come. The phone rang, an ancient landline Marcus kept because cell phones felt too connected to a world that had moved on without him. The number on the caller ID made his chest tighten with a familiar mixture of love and shame. Hi, sweetheart. Dad. Sarah's voice carried that careful distance she'd perfected since his breakdown. Professional but warm, like she was managing a difficult client. How are you feeling today? Marcus muted the television, Tommy's face freezing mid-smile. Good. Better. You? I got the part. The words hit him harder than he'd expected. Sarah had been chasing this role for months, a supporting character in what the trades were calling the year's prestige drama. Real money, real exposure, the kind of break that could launch a career into the stratosphere. That's wonderful, honey. You deserve it. Do I? The question carried weight he didn't want to unpack. Sarah had inherited his eyes, gray-green and too perceptive, but she'd gotten her mother's conscience. Every opportunity came with guilt, wondering if his reputation had somehow opened doors that should have remained closed. You earned it, Marcus said, meaning it. You're better than I ever was. Different business now, Dad. Social media changes everything. One viral moment can end careers overnight. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd destroyed Tommy in an age when scandal moved at the speed of print journalism and morning radio. Now humiliation traveled at light speed, reaching millions before the victim even knew they'd been hit. You'll be fine, he said. You're smart. Smarter than your old man. A pause. Through his thin walls, he could hear his neighbor channel surfing, the rapid-fire audio snippets creating a disjointed soundtrack of modern life. Game shows, news anchors, laugh tracks from sitcoms that would be canceled by Christmas. I worry about you, Sarah said finally. In that place, all alone. I'm not alone. Mrs. Chen keeps me company. He forced lightness into his voice. Did you know she played Carnegie Hall in 1973? Dad. I'm fine, Sarah. Focus on your career. This is your time. After she hung up, Marcus sat in the gathering dusk, watching shadows creep across his walls. The apartment was a tomb of his former life. Framed photos from premieres where he'd stood beside A-listers, back when his whisper could topple empires. Now those same faces looked down at him from their frames with what felt like pity. He opened another bottle, the cork making that satisfying pop that promised temporary amnesia. The scotch burned less than it used to. His liver had given up protesting years ago. The television flickered back to life under his thumb. Tommy's face filled the screen again. Young, defiant, impossibly composed for someone whose career was ending in real time. Marcus had watched this footage thousands of times, searching for clues he'd missed in the moment. Some tell that would have warned him of the trap he was walking into. But Tommy had been perfect. Even knowing what Marcus knew now, that the photographs were accurate, that the scandal was real, that Tommy's reputation deserved to burn, he couldn't help but admire the performance. The way Tommy had turned Marcus's greatest weapon against him with surgical precision. It was almost artistic. A knock at the door made Marcus freeze. Mrs. Chen had signed for packages before, and the building manager had his own key. No one else visited. No one else knew where Hollywood's former king had fallen to earth. Through the peephole, Marcus saw a young man in a delivery uniform holding a manila envelope. Nothing threatening about it. Just another lost soul making minimum wage in a city that devoured dreams. But as Marcus opened the door, something in the courier's smile sent ice through his veins. Something familiar. Something that whispered of 30-year-old promises finally coming due. Marcus Kellerman? The young man asked. Marcus nodded, already knowing this moment would change everything. The studio lights felt like interrogation beams. Marcus gripped the booth's control panel, his knuckles white against the black plastic. Below, Tommy remained frozen center stage, that impossible smile never wavering. The host, a veteran who'd seen everything, shuffled the damning photographs back into their envelope, clearly rattled. Well, the host stammered, that's certainly unexpected. But Tommy wasn't done. He turned slowly, scanning the darkened audience with the patience of a predator. When his gaze found the producer's booth, Marcus felt his blood crystallize. Those eyes, cold, calculating, almost amused, locked onto his, through the tinted glass that should have kept him invisible. Cut to commercial. Marcus barked into his headset. "We've got 2 minutes left in the segment," the director's voice crackled back. "Cut to fucking commercial, now." The red recording lights died. The audience murmured in confusion as stagehands appeared like phantoms, ushering Tommy toward the wings. But the young actor moved with deliberate slowness, never breaking eye contact with Marcus. Even as security guided him off stage, Tommy's head remained turned toward the booth. Marcus stumbled backward, knocking over his chair. His assistant, Jennifer, materialized beside him with a concerned expression. "Marcus, what just happened down there?" He couldn't answer. His throat had closed, his chest tightening with each breath. How did Tommy know? Marcus had been meticulous. The photos were untraceable, the sources protected by layers of intermediaries. The leak had appeared to come from a disgruntled crew member on Tommy's last film, a nobody who'd already been paid to disappear. But those 7 words, "Thank you, Marcus. I'll see you soon." "Sir?" Jennifer pressed. "Should I call Mr. Davidson?" Davidson, the network executive who'd greenlit this character assassination, who'd promised Marcus a 2-year exclusive deal if he could neutralize the Tommy problem. Some problem, a 24-year-old actor whose only crime was refusing to play ball with the right people. No, Marcus managed. Handle the aftermath. Standard crisis protocol. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the exit, pushing through the maze of cables and equipment that cluttered the booth. Behind him, Jennifer was already on the phone, her voice smooth and professional as she began the delicate work of spinning tonight's disaster. The hallway outside buzzed with activity. Network suits clustered in urgent conversation while assistants scurried past with clipboards and headsets. Marcus moved through it all like a ghost, his mind stuck on that moment when Tommy's eyes had found his. The parking garage offered no relief. Every shadow seemed to harbor watching eyes. Marcus fumbled for his keys, hands shaking despite his efforts to maintain control. 30 years in this business had taught him to compartmentalize, to treat each operation like a chess move devoid of emotion. But this felt different. This felt personal. His Porsche roared to life, and Marcus peeled out of the garage onto Alameda Avenue. The city lights blurred past as he drove aimlessly through Burbank, trying to process what had gone wrong. Tommy should have been destroyed, should have slunk away in shame, another cautionary tale about the price of defying the industry's unspoken rules. Instead, he'd turned the tables with surgical precision. Marcus pulled into a 24-hour diner on Ventura Boulevard and sat in his car, engine running. Through the windows, he could see late-night stragglers nursing coffee and pie, their faces illuminated by harsh fluorescent lighting. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the games played in boardrooms and studio lots. His car phone rang, the shrill tone cutting through his thoughts. Kellerman. "Marcus, it's Davidson. What the hell was that? A miscalculation. A miscalculation? That kid just accused you by name on national television. Do you understand the exposure that creates?" Marcus closed his eyes. Of course Davidson would be more concerned about liability than the implications of Tommy's impossible knowledge. "The audience thought it was part of the show," Marcus said. "Comedy bit, we can spin it, can we? Because my phone's been ringing for the past 20 minutes with very concerned parties asking very pointed questions. The concerned parties, the shadow financiers and studio heads who preferred their dirty work handled quietly, invisibly. Men who could end careers with a phone call, who expected problems to disappear without trace or consequence. "Give me 48 hours, Marcus said. "You've got 24. And Marcus? This can't happen again." The line went dead. Marcus sat in the parking lot, watching steam rise from the diner's kitchen exhaust. Somewhere in this city, Tommy was planning his next move. The question was whether Marcus would be ready for it. He put the car in drive and headed home, unaware that 30 years later, he'd still be waiting for the other shoe to drop.